one specific industry, and there are questions that are asked. They're general questions so that we can find out the latest trends, find out the latest issues that are happening across the board. I remind all of our folks that are asking questions when we get to the question and answer section of the program, that they be questions directed to the general good of the order. In other words, it will not incite any discussions of competition between companies, because it's almost like mentioning. It's also like mentioning commission when you talk in these meetings. So we'd like to keep it general. We are going to start, as we always do, having the panel introduce themselves and let us know how long they've done this. And I guess for a good order, we can ask what is their favorite saying? What is their favorite saying? All right, starting with my fair lady on the right.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Maria Howard, and as you know, I'm with First American Natural Hazard Disclosures, and also our other brand is JCP-LGS. I've been with First American 4 years, and I was an escrow officer for 23, so I've been in the industry a total of 27 years. I don't really have a favorite saying, but one of my favorite things is a quote from Maya Angelou, and it goes, people won't remember what you do, people won't remember what you say, but people will always remember how you made them feel. So that's kind of my little sense for me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. John Wax, America West, Natural Hazard Disclosures. I have been in the industry over 20 years doing natural hazard disclosures. I've been with a couple of companies, and I'm coming up on 3 years with America West. And my favorite saying is, be positive, it's not just a blood type.
Good morning. My name is Eric Spitz. I've been in the industry since 1987. I was the I started and founded LGS Retrofitters, LGS Reports, which I sold, of course, in 2005 to First American Title. About 5 years ago, I started my NHD, Natural Hazard Disclosures. Favorite saying? I don't, but I just, take the high road, do the right thing, always.
Perfect, thank you. We're going to get started. I'm going to start with Maria. And I'm going to ask you if you could tell the folks exactly what the purpose is of an HT.
Oh, well, the purpose of the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report is, of course, it's for your disclosure for your residential and commercial piece of property. There is a civil code pertaining to 1103 for the state of California, and is that any seller that enters into a real estate transaction to disclose to a buyer the 6 minimum requirements, and that's the earthquake, fire, and flood. Flood meaning your FEMA and your dam inundation, your fault lines, which includes seismic, and then your fire zones, which is the wildfire and the high severity fire areas.
Perfect, thank you. John, what happens if a property is determined to be in a flood zone?
Well, as we all know, flood zones change on a continuous basis in LA County, usually every year to 6 months. They're reassessed. And it's not all bad if it does appear that the property is in a flood zone. The only person that can go out to a property and actually assess for flood insurance risk purposes is a land surveyor. And a land surveyor goes out there and determines if it's high, low, or medium risk. And then what happens is it triggers insurance, additional insurance costs. So the only way to reduce insurance costs and be a hero to your clients is to have a land surveyor go out to the property. And if he happens to be a civil engineer, he can also do map revision requests. So like if one side of the property is in a flood, on the street is in a flood zone, the other is not, you have to be in the flood zone area, he can request FEMA to readdress that issue and review their maps and see if you can get a change to it so your clients will pay less in flood insurance.
Perfect. Over to Eric. Eric, what is a very high fire severity zone, and how does it compare to a state fire responsibility area?
Both these zones are high risk for fires. what they are. What actually the very high fire severity zone and the difference between that and a state fire responsibility area is who takes responsibility on fighting the fire. You know, the very high fire severity zones are typically done by the local municipalities. State fire responsibility area is more required by the state. Now, as we have always understood, you can be in one or the other. But in the past couple of years, I've actually seen properties in both. And by definition, it either is one or the other. But what we've been seeing happening is the state may change their map, and then they send their revisions down to the county level, and the county is not changing it so fast. So therefore, you could be in both. Being in one of these zones, there might be an additional fee and brush clearing requirements for the property.
Perfect. Maria, over to you. Who is actually legally responsible for disclosing whether the property is in one or more of the 6 zones, and where can that person obtain these maps or lists?
Well, who is legally responsible, because you all know that natural hazard disclosures is an unregulated industry. And so therefore, it's kind of, I always tell everybody, it's kind of a lopsided responsibility. NHD companies aren't regulated, yet you are responsible for their disclosure. Out of the 6 that are mandated per state of California, 2 are the seller's requirement, and that is the wildfire and the high severity fire areas that Eric spoke about. The other 4 is your seller. So these are caveats in your industry that you really have to know who the fault lies on for the disclosure. You as realtors and your sellers aren't going to know where those places are, right? So you defer that over to a third party, such as a natural hazard company. So I also, if you're interested, I kind of give these to the realtors in the classes that I've taught, and this is really important thing to have. It's a Q&A done by CAR, and it gives you all the questions and bullet points that are the most common to come up. And I really recommend that you keep this in your syllabus of libraries of research that you keep for your industry. Very good, important information for you.
Okay. John, and how can an environmental report protect the parties to a transaction? Now we're getting to the nitty-gritty of when it gets to the transaction.
Well, I know that NHD and tax is required on 1 to 4 units, but however, you might want to go a step further. And as my buddy Gov Hutchinson said, there's no such thing as over-disclosing. So what you should do is order the environmental report, find out if there's anything that pertains to the property. Oftentimes what happens is if you go with the NHD and tax and don't get an environmental report, 5 years maybe or longer, they find out when they dig their pools that there may be a contaminated source that got into the groundwater because 40 years ago there was a gas station that they didn't have the proper type of tanks, and it ate through the container and gets into the backyards. If you get that report, they sign off on it, and that way you're protected, your seller's protected, and all parties of the transaction are put on notice of what contaminations may be affecting that property or could affect that property, and then it avoids lawsuits. And remember, we want to be proactive and not retroactive, because lawsuits cost money. Think about it. A report versus $10,000 to retain an attorney that you're going to have to fight something like that. You know what I mean? So you got to be proactive and make sure that you get the proper reports that you need in order to protect all parties to the transaction.
Thank you, Eric. And I really appreciate your succinct answers. Thank you very much. Eric, does a disclosure report need to have maps to be compliant?
Does not. The required disclosure is, are you in a zone or not in a zone? So there's no requirement that maps need to be shown on these reports. Sometimes a map can even scare your clients, because if you are not in a fault zone, why would you want to show them that they're near a fault zone? Not required at all.
Perfect.
If anybody requests maps, we certainly can provide copies of maps showing where the property is in relation to a particular zone, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, different views as well, but not required.
Perfect. Maria, once the seller provides a completed NHD, how many days before does the buyer have before they send in the right of rescission?
Okay. The Natural Hazard Disclosure Report is treated like your TDS, which is your transfer disclosure. You have 3 days by hand delivery, 5 days by certified mail. And that clock starts ticking once the buyer has received it. One of the best practice I instruct is that always order the NHD report at listing, because you get in trouble if you wait later on. I can't tell you how many times I get a call, and I'm sure John can attest to this, and say, and Eric, I forgot, I need it. And then your buyer gets it, you're at loan docs, there's something on there that they don't like, a fault zone, high fire, or flood insurance is required, and they turn around and walk away from your transaction, and you have just invested 3 weeks of your time. Best practice, get it at listing.
And John, how has the new RPA contract changed when ordering your NHD reports?
Just really quick on Maria's comment. Yes, it has happened. I've even said, we're closing at 5 o'clock today. Can you get me an NHD report? So it is one of the things that you should order at time of listing. There's no charge or penalty to your client, and that way they have valuable information that they use to help market their properties. Okay, regarding the new RPA, everyone had a class. Wasn't there a class here that I think Gov came and talked about the new RPA?
And there's another one.
Is it next week? There's another one? Okay,
Yeah,
well, I've seen them many times. One of the things that affects us is that in the contract on page 2, in the same paragraph, now it's a little bit more complete. Not only do you put the company you want to use, but there's also a checkoff box, because 1 to 5 units requires an NHD and tax. 1 to 4 units, 5 or more does not. But 1 to 4 units, you have to check a box now, and it says environmental and tax. So you want to make sure that you check the box. I think what they're trying to do is encourage you to do like they are up in Northern California, is to include an environmental report when you order a report, so there's no question as to whether or not everyone's getting the disclosed information, and to avoid some lawsuits by doing so, because they're going to know way ahead of time what's going on with that property. If there's an environmental aspect, if it's in a flood zone, if it's in any type of zone that might affect the a material fact, which is anything that's in the NHD report that affects their decision making as to whether or not they want to buy or sell real estate.
Perfect. Eric, are Belarus and 1915 bonds required to be disclosed?
They are required to be disclosed. You know, Belarus are a way for the developer to help finance the properties that he's building, the tract that he's building. The infrastructure, it pays for the infrastructure, the streets, the lighting, the sewer, the drains, things like that. And the requirements upon the Belarus are the starting date, the ending date, how much you can increase per year, contact information, and what is the current levy. That's the Belarus. The 1915 bonds, unlike the way a developer can finance, it's a way for the public agencies to finance, voted on by the public, and there's no increase in value. It's a set amount, and every property in LA County has a 1915 bond. Very few Belaruses around here, but every property in LA County has currently has a 1915 bonds, and some of them could be for the high fire severity zones to pay for that. Others are the parks and recs, so you're paying for the parks and the upkeep of all the parks in the area. And they are required, and if they are not paid for, the reason why these two are required, because there's a lot of assessments on the tax bill, as you can see in these reports. And the reason why these two are called out separately is because if these two are not paid, it can trigger an accelerated foreclosure.
And then also, one thing to add is there's also a maximum acceleration rate that's noted in there too. It can go up to 2%.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that as well regarding the taxes. Remember that the tax reports that are illustrated in the NHG report, they have these special assessments and direct taxes and the private taxes, which are not disclosed on your preliminary title report. So it's really important to look at that tax report that is in your NHD report. Seriously, you really should
look at it. And you
won't
know the name of it, you know,
yes.
Just by that it will state what the name is.
Yes.
That's very good info. That's very good.
Everyone is commenting on a lot of the things that we're saying.
What we're going to do is we're going to open up the question. We're going to open up the question and answer. We're going to open up the question and answer session right now. Thank you for all of that. We have time for some questions and answers. If someone could Does anybody have any questions?
Give us the answer, we'll give you the question, or the other way around? Whatever
Yeah,
you
give
want.
us the answer. We'll tell you the question.
Anyone?
Anything. You got experts
I've
here.
I've got some comments I can make on some of the things that were said earlier. I have a little bit of a different take on the environmental report. Although I think it's a great report, although we offer the report, I don't agree that you should be ordering it for the protection, and that it should be because you need to disclose as much as you can. We try and stick to exactly what the state requires, exactly what the state requires in the NHD. And on the environmental reports, you're going a little bit across the board. If you want to try and give whatever you can give, why wouldn't you do a phase 1 or even further than that? So, and have a geologist come out and take a look at the property. You know, so we stick exactly what the NHD does. I don't push the environmental report. We have the environmental report. It has a lot of things in there that they have in their reports, and it has a lot of things that they don't have in their reports, and vice versa. So I really don't push it the way I like sticking exactly what the state was. And I look at this, like, why aren't we always pulling permits on properties? You know, we don't want to open up things that really aren't required by exactly what the state requires us to do. So that's kind of my take on the.
So would you say, along with that, would you say that it does depend on preference of the buyers and the sellers?
Right. Definitely. I mean,
because I know that we know with the age of computers, and with the age of Google, and with the age of memes going out there, that we have more sophisticated buyers.
No
and
question
sellers.
about it. Listen, if your sellers or buyers know something, if the sellers know something, or if you know something, you've got to disclose it. No question about it. You've got to disclose it. But there's no reason to keep digging. You know, do exactly what the state requires us to do, and that's what we do. So we really don't push that environmental as that type of thing. Remember, these reports came about, as Maria spoke earlier, because people were signing the RPAs, the purchase agreements, and the sellers were answering these questions. Are we in a flood zone? No, we're not. In a fire zone? Just, I don't know. No, we're not. And there were lawsuits. And there were lawsuits because of that. So in '94, actually 76 since JCP, but in '94, people started buying these reports because these companies started doing these reports in '94. Of course, in '98, to take the liability off the seller and off the agent. And of course, in '98, it became law. And we stick exactly what the law says.
So let me follow up with this question. Would you say that because of all those lawsuits that tenants are being developed for, just how far or how much or one should disclose?
Tendencies, I think because of those lawsuits, the NHD was formed, the Natural Hazard Disclosure.
Well, we do live in a very litigious state,
Yes,
so that would make sense.
Yeah, as I always say, we're not in Missouri, the show me state. We're in California, the sue me state.
That's right.
Well, I like to comment as well regarding the environmental. Eric is absolutely correct. The environmental portion of the report is not a requirement for the state of California. However, if it's information that a buyer can go to the EPA website and find out information pertaining to their property, and they came back to you and said, well, Mr. Listing Agent, why didn't you tell me? I may have not purchased this property. And material effect is something should be disclosed. So these environmental issues are available. So it is material fact. And it's basically, yes, it's a choice to include it in your report. I feel it's necessary. Disclosures, lawsuits drive disclosures, correct? Back in 2010, when the explosion came about for the transmission gas line up in San Bruno, what has changed since then? Your Governor Brown has now signed the AB 1511. It's part of the change. Your SBQ forms are not changing. Your disclosure reports are changing. They're asking for your seller to disclose if they're near a transmission pipeline. Is the transmission pipeline in disclosure? No, it's an advisory. But I think you can see where things are heading now, where things are being made more responsible to you in a real estate transaction. I think it's best practice. If it's there, I think you should disclose it.
Again, I guess that this is an issue that is going to vary depending on the sophistication of the clients, their knowledge and whatnot. Let's move on so that we